When Ethan Carter, the heir to the Carter global empire, turned 18 years old, he anticipated that his billionaire father, Richard Carter, would shower him with lavish gifts, lavish parties, and luxury automobiles, or at the very least, a large check. Instead, his father presented him with a phony identification card and a janitor's outfit. The tone of Richard's voice was strong as he said, "You will be spending the next month working at our corporate headquarters. There will be no one who know who you are. The minimum wage will be earned by you, and you will have an understanding of what it means to labor." Ethan was angry with rage, because he had spent his childhood in penthouses and private planes. He did not consider it beneath him to scrub floors and clean toilets. With hate blazing in his belly, Ethan became Ethan Miller, the new janitor at Carter Global. However, his father's word was law, and as a result, Ethan started working there. On the very first day, the workers treated him as if he were dirt. Lisa, the receptionist, chuckled to herself as she threw her coffee cups, which were only halfway full, into his cleaning cart. "Make yourself useful, kid," she cackled with a sneer. His mop buckets were trodden on by executives dressed in fitted suits, and they did not apologize for their actions. His request for assistance with the printer was met with laughter by the IT staff, who referred to him as clueless. To make matters even worse, the most conceited vice president of operations, Mark Reynolds, seemed to get a great deal of satisfaction from humiliating him. "Hey, mop boy," Mark yelled out one day, pointing to a cappuccino that had been spilled. "Get this area cleaned up before someone makes a mistake and sues us." "What's that?" "It's likely that you have no idea what a lawsuit is." Even though he was clenching his hands, Ethan did not speak. Regardless of the circumstances, he had assured his father that he would never expose his true identity. Mark was gushing to a bunch of managers one day, and Ethan happened to overhear him. "I swear, the higher-ups are getting cheap," Mark sniffed. "I was just kidding. Employing an idiot to clean up after us is a terrible idea. It's a very low chance of even being accepted into a community college." Those around them laughed. Ethan's cheeks was ablaze with embarrassment. Even though he was ready to give up, he contacted his father that night. He soothed. "They treat me like I'm nothing," and he was furious. "Good," Richard responded when he had listened with composure. "This is how the majority of people throughout the globe live." Richard Carter arrived to the workplace on the day that Ethan was leaving, but he was not wearing his regular fancy suit. Instead, he was dressed in the same janitor disguise that his son had worn. He went unnoticed by everyone. Lisa rolled her eyes in response to the new janitor asking for instructions, and he stared on as she did so. In response to Mark's act of throwing a stack of papers onto the ground, he yelled out, "Pick these up, old man." In the next step, Richard took off his spectacles and cap. The silence had the effect of a hammer. Lisa let out a gasp. Mark's eyes became pallid. As the wealthy CEO straightened his stance and cast his steely glare over himself and his employees, the whole floor became completely still. Richard's voice was eerily calm as he pointed out, "You've all had fun making fun of my son today. Now let's see how you handle unemployment." Security personnel led Mark Reynolds out of the building by the time the day came to a close. The position of data entering from a distant location was sent to Lisa. It was decided to either dismiss or demote the most serious offenders. However, Richard was not finished. He stood next to Ethan, who was now dressed in a smart suit, and presented extensive reforms at an emergency meeting of the firm. These changes included better salaries for janitorial personnel, mandatory respect training, and a new rule that every CEO would spend 1 week every year performing entry-level labor. "Because if you can't respect the people who keep this company running," Richard said to me, "you don't deserve to lead them." Ethan comprehended the lesson that his father had taught him. In addition, from that point on, Carter Global was not just a powerhouse of riches, it also became an example of decency. There was complete silence in the boardroom as the words of Richard Carter lingered in the air. The executives squirmed uneasily in their chairs, their smug assurance broken as they saw the situation unfold. As Ethan stood next to his father, he was no longer the inconspicuous janitor, but rather the heir to an empire. He was the one who had practically witnessed the transformation of the firm from its start. He switched his attention to his kid. "Now, Ethan, tell them what you've learned." Everyone's attention was focused on the young guy who had been ridiculed. humiliated, and undervalued on several occasions. For a moment, Ethan inhaled deeply. The tone of his voice remained calm as he said, "I realized that titles do not make leaders. Respect does." The changes that took place at Carter Global were both rapid and severe. The once powerful vice president, Mark Reynolds, found himself on the receiving end of a blacklist from the business world as news spread about his overconfident behavior. There was a decision presented to Lisa, a dismissive receptionist. Either she would undergo sensitivity training and begin her career in a different area, or she would quit. She made the wise decision to remain. However, Richard was not yet finished instructing his kid. He informed Ethan one evening in his office, "You've seen how people treat those they think are beneath them." Ethan was there during the occurrence. "Now it's time to see how they treat those they fear." It was stated by Richard that Ethan would temporarily take over the role as acting CEO while he went abroad for a personal retreat. The board of directors was incensed because many of them had anticipated that the 18-year-old janitor they had mocked a few weeks earlier would do the job, instead of an experienced CEO. The act of sabotage started as soon as Richard left the room. An unidentified source disclosed to the media that Ethan was inept and seemed to be nothing more than a spoilt, privileged kid pretending to be CEO. The deliberate delays, according to senior management, they forgot to provide him key reports, and then they blamed him for missing deadlines. As part of the revolt of the board, a group headed by CFO Daniel Graves advocated for an emergency vote to remove Ethan from his position, referring to his leadership as a joke. As a janitor, Ethan had been subjected to ridicule. As a CEO, he was now experiencing betrayal. Daniel Graves wore a smile as he rose to address the audience at the crucial board meeting that had been called. "To the best of my knowledge, Ethan, you are not prepared for this. There is a problem with the firm. Real leadership is what we need." The look on Ethan's face was undecipherable as he sat back in his chair. Quite fascinating. For the reason that, according to the data that I gathered last night, earnings have increased by 12% during this quarter. He blinked his eyes. "I can't even fathom it happening." Clearly, the reports demonstrated that, the fake reports you gave me. The key on Ethan's laptop was tapped by him. In addition to the damaging emails that were exchanged between Daniel and other executives who were planning to sabotage him, the screen that was behind him lighted up with actual financials. The atmosphere in the room exploded. In the midst of Daniel's confused attempt to provide an explanation, the door suddenly opened. Richard Carter walked in, his sharp suit and even sharper look quickly putting an end to the conversation in the room. According to him, "Did you really think that I wouldn't be watching?" he said in a voice as strong as steel. Daniel's face became pallid. "You're fired." The tone of Richard's voice was not raised. He had no reason to do so. "If any of you ever try to stab my son in the back again, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." At a later time, Richard poured 2 glasses of whiskey and gave one of them to Ethan in the penthouse on the premises. "You passed," he replied in a straightforward manner. Ethan wore a frown. That was all a test, of course. Richard gave a sneer. "Not only does power expose character, but it also kills those who are weak and elevates those who are strong. It is clear that you are a powerful individual." Taking a sip of his drink, Ethan felt the fire in his chest, which was far more intense than the burn of the whiskey. "So what's next?" The smile that Richard wore was wolfish. "Now you build your own empire." After 5 years, Ethan Carter was standing on the balcony of his just-finished skyscraper, which was the location of Ethan Corp, a corporation that was well known for its unrivaled employee devotion and its merciless organizational efficiency. His very first rule? 1 week out of every year is spent by each executive working in an entry-level position. And what about the once great Carter Global? To put it simply, let's say that Daniel Graves wasn't the only person who gained knowledge during that particular year. Is this it? Or is this just the beginning?